Hey, old Fart Rants. How you doing, moron? Troglodyte. Before we get into the main event of this will be I challenged old Fart Rants to do a video on the Janus versus AFSCME decision, which was rendered today. And I went over to the Other Dude Productions channel, which I ran him off of. He quit posting about 6 months ago because I basically stomped his arguments into oblivion so many times he left. And I did not engage any of the carnival barkers. You know, this channel has no content clowns that hang around him. So he decided to take his ball and go home. Well, I'd been posting that challenge over there for over a week. Every morning before I go to work, if you're a Bernie Sanders supporter, work, that's some place you go to make money. Usually in the morning, unless you work second or third shift. And he did come back over there and had a little angry hissy fit, so I verified that he saw it. Now, I gave him, he balked on the Union Goon challenge back in December. So this was kind of just another chance for him to humiliate himself. And we'll go over some of that. But I wanted to get a couple things in first. Dave, I still haven't seen a response to you. I totally debunked a response from you. I totally debunked your very generalized comments on the Koch brothers and campaign finance reform because all your arguments are short and silly. He's asked me for a summary. I've given him like a 60-page reply on something. He throws an angry hissy fit and then demands a summary. No, dude. This guy, he outs himself as an uneducated idiot, and he is. I don't know. I think his brains are oatmeal or tapioca or something. But I haven't seen you respond to that. I totally demolished your campaign finance reform Koch brother whining. I also totally destroyed your short and idiotic moving goalpost videos on voter suppression and vote fraud. So I gave detailed reasons, many of them, to people should doubt anything you say on that, because even if it were possible for you to mount a response to that, you're too lazy to do so despite having 24 hours of free time every day. And you've pretty much had that free time since you began vegetating on YouTube, which is why I call you a YouTube vegetable, not a social media vegetable like, say, a Jacqueline Glenn, who has accounts everywhere, but you vegetate on YouTube. So I haven't seen a response on that. But what Old Fart Rants do is he slowed down his video making. I think he's on his way out as far as YouTube. I don't know if he's going to be uploading much. He might come in to vomit every once in a while to vomit something out, but he slowed down his video making. But he still has all that free time to try to yell over everybody. So I think what he'll try to do is just ignore my arguments and just move on to something else. And then if I refute that, he'll move on to something else. That's what he does. So I'm still waiting for a response on that, Dave. So why don't you get to it? Because I'm going to keep getting after you about it, and there's nothing you can do about it. So now what I'm going to do is upload a template from a kind of a template video that I'll use as response to other morons who are going into hysterics over the Janus decision, and go over some of the things I covered when I gave Old Fart Rants the Union Goon challenge back in December. And I don't need a teleprompter either for this like Dave does. Dave's sitting there reading off a teleprompter like a zombie, and has to edit his video every 10 seconds. You see him bouncing around like some autistic ping pong ball. So we'll get to some of the stuff I covered in my Union Goon challenge, and that will be linked below for anybody who wants to read it and see why unions are largely, they're a parasite is what they are, and the Janus ruling was correct. Let's get to that. Okay, I'm just going to read off a few things from my Union Goon challenge. I posed a few questions to these morons on what would happen if, hypothetically, the CEOs of several retail giants colluded to fix prices and keep them high on, say, made in USA clothing. I picked this because socialists, like these idiots, also despise competition from brown foreigners as their stuff is garbage and should not be tolerated by the American consumer. Ergo, all competition must be restricted to protect American businesses. If those CEOs did that, and smoking gun evidence of it, for example, emails, was illuminated, they would be getting to know the DOJ and FBI on a first-name basis. I'm not arguing whether price collusion should be illegal. I'm just stating this as a fact. It is illegal right now. Price collusion, price fixing is illegal, and you will be prosecuted for it. Should you be prosecuted for it, and if so, why? That's for another day, folks. I will say that opening up American markets to as much competition as possible and removing barriers to business startups is a good remedy to this, as price fixing is much, much more difficult in that environment. So, if it's illegal for CEOs of several retail giants to collude and keep prices on made in USA clothing high, is it or should it also be illegal for a collective, e.g. 60% of the employees, to get together and demand collective bargaining so they can artificially spike wages and benefits? Uh-oh! So these people support a group of bottom feeders becoming a Borg collective, and that's another thing I should note. These people hate the individual. You hate the individual. Disgusting. What do you think we're some, sheep hive mentality. They support a group of bottom feeders becoming a Borg collective and engaging in wage fixing and benefit fixing because they own the business now, you see. But if multimillionaire CEOs or CEOs that make a mere $250,000 engage in price fixing, by golly, heads will roll. So that should be noted. Yeah, okay, we can get together and shake down businesses. And that's okay, especially if you're not in a right-to-work state. Thankfully, Iowa is a right-to-work state. But if CEOs do that for clothing or their products, oh boy, guess what? So we got a little bit of hypocrisy there. Yeah, I remember the last job, I'll tell you a little story real quick. Last job my father had before he retired for a big evil corporation, big evil multinational. And he didn't witness this, but he heard about it. There were a couple occasions where they'd hire somebody, and then this, I don't know if he was a union salt or what, but he'd start agitating about collective bargaining. Well, he was, let's just say someone grabbed him by the back of the neck and he was paraded to the door. Because you don't own the business. It's amazing. You didn't get the angel capital, the angel investors to invest in it. You didn't sleep in the office overnight because you didn't know if you were going to open the doors tomorrow. You didn't do any of the legwork, and then you get hired there and you think, wow, you own the business. No, you don't. You would get escorted out of the building by the scruff of your neck. I can mention this. I should mention this. One major victory for liberty occurred with the passage of Taft-Hartley, the Labor Management Relations Act of 1947, Harry Truman's veto notwithstanding. As an aside, Rep. Brad Sherman, that's Old Fart Rants' congressman, by the way. He lives in Sherman's district. Brad Sherman tried to put an end to Taft-Hartley back in 2010. So this was 1947. Boy, the Democrat Party has become unhinged and crazy. Over 3/4 of House Democrats at the time voted to override Truman's veto, and over one-third of Senate Democrats voted to override. Back then, Democrats weren't quite as crazy as they are now, because we got things like Brad Sherman trying to end Taft-Hartley, and you've got the Employee Free Choice Act. I'll go over that real quick. I also mentioned Neil Gorsuch, and I predicted this back in December. Janus versus AFSCME. Spells doom for union goons. Yes, now you will not be able to. Free riders. They call them free riders. That's like handcuffing someone to you and saying, oh, he's a free rider. No, not a free rider. Again, they hate the individual. It's a Borg collective. If I don't want the union stealing money from me, I shouldn't. You know, it's a basic principle of liberty. And people like, Stan Cedar and that anemic little troglodyte Jacqueline Glenn, they don't get it. So the union goons are going to lose a lot of electioneering money, thankfully. Here's another little factoid. The National Labor Relations Board enabled micro-unions. Well, they were trying to push this through. Here's what a micro-union would be. Let's say you're working at a grocery store and you have 4 different departments. You have baggers, checkers, etc. They would allow the baggers to unionize if there was a majority of them. So you would have one micro-union within a store. Yeah, that wouldn't cause any problems, I'm sure. That was Obama's National Labor Relations Board. Of course, if I was the owner of the grocery store, especially if it's baggers, I'm sure you could find plenty of people. You could still have unions. You could still have a collective if you have a business and enough of the good employees go up to you and say, we're not happy with this, we're not happy with that. The employer will bend. I've seen this occur. The employer will bend to their will. Now, if you're useless, not necessarily useless, let's say you have no work experience and you're doing a mundane task, if you ask for $15 an hour, you're probably going to get laughed at or shown the door. But if you're valuable, enough valuable employees do that, they will bend to your will. Now, the union is just a middleman that steals your money. These micro-unions were ridiculous. That's Obama for you. The National Labor Relations Board also tried to jam through snap elections, which Obama's National Labor Relations Board was in the process of shortening the election period from 6 weeks to as little as 10 days. These snap elections would allow unions to campaign for months and then call for a vote before workers, I prefer the term employees, hear the other side. So he was stacking it against business owners. The people who actually started the business, and some of them had a shoestring budget for a while, didn't know if they were going to open the doors tomorrow or not, and grew the business. Now, Obama, on the other hand, especially Bernie Sanders, Bernie's never had a real job. I mean, Bernie Sanders is literally the most worthless pile of you-know-what I've ever seen. Lazy, just a lazy old man with dentures that look like he scooped him out of the garbage can. So, snap elections and micro-unions was another way they were trying to hammer business owners. Here's another one. The National Labor Relations Board strikes down attempts to raise wages without union permission. The Brooklyn Hospital Center rewarded its best nurses with $100 gift cards. The NLRB told the hospital to cease and desist. So, not a meritocracy. Because you know what? I hate to tell you guys, but in any workplace, now again, you hate the individual, so you may not comprehend this. Try to get it through your pea brain. Some nurses in the hospital are better than other nurses. Some truck drivers are better than other truck drivers. Some machinists are a lot better than other machinists. Some forklift drivers can't drive a forklift and then they get taken off the forklift. And some forklift drivers are really good at what they do. It's a meritocracy. You guys got to understand that, not everybody is great at everything. Here's another one. Imagine that you're a small business owner getting ready to go into your busy season when several protesters come onto your property and begin disrupting your workers, your employees. Ordinarily, you would call the police. I know what I'd do. I can't tell you. It would involve a brushback. Ordinarily, you would call the police and have the trespassers removed so that you can continue with your operations. But in California, that's where that anemic little troglodyte Jacqueline Glenn's from. But in California, that's not an option for some property owners. Cedar Point Nursery, a strawberry farm near the Oregon border, didn't have to imagine that scenario. In fall of 2015, Union Goons entered Cedar Point's property at 5 o'clock in the morning, moving through trim sheds where hundreds of employees were preparing strawberry plants during the final stage of the 6-week harvesting season, with bullhorns distracting and intimidating its workers. This is where you would think you could appeal to the authorities and have unwanted visitors removed. But in 1975, California's Agricultural Relations Board promulgated a regulation that promotes trespassing. This law, known as the Access Regulation, grants a right of access by union organizers to the premises of an agricultural employer for up to 3 hours a day and 120 days a year. In other words, California has granted an easement for unions to enter onto private property, extinguishing the owner's right to exclude others. The Fourth Amendment, however, protects private businesses and everyone else from such an invasion of their property rights. Indeed, the Fourth Amendment was drafted as a bulwark against the rampant government oppressions, invasions of people's houses and businesses without a warrant. That existed before the founding. The right to exclude was a fundamental aspect of the protection of property at common law and has continued to be recognized as such throughout our nation's history. Yet the access regulation essentially deputizes trespassers who, through their disruptive presence, are allowed to seize private property. Cedar Point brought a civil rights suit against the ALRB and United Farm Workers, but the district court ignored the importance of property rights in determining whether the Fourth Amendment was implicated and upheld the law. Cato has now filed an amicus brief in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit supporting Cedar Point and other property owners and asking that the district court be reversed. So yeah, that's California for you. I've also got a section in there about how these union goons fighting for the little guy do pretty well. For example, Richard Trumka, he's that really fat guy, and the AFL-CIO, big fat guy. He made more than $300,000 in 2015. AFT President Randy, would you like some cheese with that Weingarten, made off with almost $500,000. SEIU President Mary Kay Henry only made $296,500. Earlier this year, this was the Labor Pains blog, we chronicled the 10 best paid union goon bosses in terms of salary and total compensation. Some earned more than $600,000 in 2015, according to the union's filings with the Department of Labor. Airline Pilots Association President Timothy Knoll took home over $693,000. And by contrast, the average chief executive earned $185,000 in 2015, meaning that 153 union goon presidents enjoying better compensation than America's typical CEO. We better rein in union goon CEO pay. They're fighting for the little guy. And then we got challenges to California's hypocritical law, forcing farmers into collective bargaining agreements. That was a hallmark of the Employee Free Choice Act, which thankfully failed every time under the Obama regime. Binding arbitration was a hallmark, was one of the other parts of it, and as well as card check. Okay, here's another one. I've been over this in my small government stupidity videos. Government employees behaving badly, in this case public school teachers. We've been over this before. Public servants using so-called official time to do union goon duties while being paid by the taxpayer. The Philadelphia School District is in a near constant state of financial crisis. There are many factors contributing to this sorry state, particularly its governance structure, but it is compounded by fiscal mismanagement. One particularly egregious example is paying six-figure salaries to the tune of $1.5 million a year to ghost teachers that do not teach. So they're doing union goon work and getting paid for it. So, and this is a big problem at the federal level too, as far as federal employees getting paid by the taxpayer on the clock for doing union goon duties. No, you shouldn't do that. I remember when Howard Dean, he admitted that labor unions are just super PACs that Democrats like, which is something, if you don't hear Democrats whine about when FEC versus Citizens United unleash union goons too. So, you don't see them. There's the Koch brothers. Coke, come on, pound the table. Dang Koch brothers. Dang it, the Koch brothers. Yeah, what about the unions? Well, with the Janus decision, that's going to take a little bit more out of their pockets, isn't it? Oh, darn it. And unions are about as popular as a turd in the punch bowl today, unless you're a federal government employee. The percentage of American wage and salary workers who belong to a union goon or were union goons was only 11.1% in 2015, but the percentage of union members who worked for government was 48.9%, according to data released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Among government workers, those employed by local government had the highest propensity to belong to unions, 40.3%, followed by state workers, 29.6%, and then federal workers, 27.4%. So that's where AFSCME is. They want to pad the government payrolls at the local level so they can get those people, their salaries are paid by the taxpayer, and then they can confiscate that money and use that money to election year for Democrats. And yeah, so AFSCME has a lot to lose when local government isn't on a hiring binge. Among government workers, the highest percentage of union membership was reported in 1994 when it was 38.7%. The lowest percentage was a 34.4% reported in 2016. So union goons have been declining. Here's another interesting story. Teachers union goons in Michigan trying to make it impossible to opt out of being a member even after Michigan became a right-to-work state. In an apparent effort to make it even more difficult or even stop school employees from exercising their right under right to work to not pay union dues or fees, the state's largest teachers union has quietly set up an obscure post office box address to which members must send the required opt-out paperwork. It's P.O. Box 51, East Lansing, Michigan. Based on a letter the Michigan Education Association sent to members who had tried to get out and discussions with some of them, resignation requests sent to the regular union headquarters address will not be honored. An extensive search of the union's websites found references to the post office box address on just one page of the MEA's main website and on one affiliate union's website. There's no record of this post office box address existing before this month. So, what a way... We're trying to make it as difficult as possible to even leave. You see how when you do that, that means people don't want to be there. That kind of reminds me of the Berlin Wall. East Germany didn't put up the Berlin Wall because people wanted to get in. They were putting up the Berlin Wall because people wanted to get out. And the Michigan Teachers Association, Michigan Education Association goons set up this obscure post office box and were rejecting any letters to their main office saying, "Hey, I'd rather not pay dues to you morons," because people wanted to get out. So, pretty obvious. Here's another good talking point: the good old national teachers shortage. We hear this all the time. We ain't got enough teachers. Do we really have a shortage of teachers today compared to historical levels? How big were the recession layoffs in historical context? I offer an updated chart below of the percent change. This is all at the link. Since 1970 in the number of teachers and students, as well as the change in the cost per graduate of a public school K through 12 education. As the chart reveals, the recession layoffs were tiny when compared to the massive growth in our teaching workforce since 1970. To this day, we employ over 150% as many teachers as we did in 1970 to teach only 109% as many students. In other words, the number of teachers has grown 5 times faster than enrollment. That does not mean that there couldn't be a small portion of districts in the U.S. that really do need to hire teachers, but it does mean that there is no national teacher shortage compared to historical levels of employment. To anyone who claims otherwise, we can only ask, a shortage compared to what? Then I get into the Employee Free Choice Act. As I said, binding arbitration was a hallmark of it, and here's what the union goons would do. Thankfully, this failed. They set their demands really high, and then, of course, the business owner, the guy who actually put his life or put his wealth on the line, it's his livelihood. He created this business, built it from the ground up. He will say, no. So the union will make these extravagant demands, say, oh, well, I guess we don't have an agreement. Binding arbitration. That's what Obama and Bernie Sanders wanted. And then, of course, this union goon arbiter would say, well, give the unions pretty much what they want. And then, when they bankrupt your employer, Bernie will say, well, now you have your 52 weeks of unpaid vacations. So another one, card check, where they go around and certify the union with valid authorizations. This is part of the Employee Free Choice Act. How about we reelect Donald Trump via card check? If we get 50.001% of all registered voters, and just say Iowa, sign a card, saying, we're going to vote for Donald Trump, and then we get all those... into the Secretary of State's office, and Iowa's electoral votes will go to Trump, via card check. Well, no. And the Employee Free Choice Act was pretty clear. It said the board shall, if the board finds that a majority of the employees in a unit appropriate for bargaining has signed valid authorizations designated the individual or labor organization specified in the petition as their bargaining representative, and that no other individual or labor organization is currently certified or recognized as the exclusive representative of any of the employees in the unit, the board shall not direct an election but shall certify the individual or labor organization as a representative described in subsection A. So the Employee Free Choice Act, card check. Wow, that's man, that'd be like having somebody in the voting booth with you. All they have to do is signed authorizations. Vote. That's something. I mean, I tell everybody who I voted for. I voted for Gary Johnson. But if you want to keep that private and never talk about it, you can. And the Employee Free Choice Act, again, it's like the board collective. They hate the individual. Card check, binding arbitration, ridiculous. Andy Stern. He had He had an interview with that senile guy, Robert Reich. And I've linked to this video. You can go watch it. It's hilarious until you realize how much of an authoritarian this guy is. He called it third world for the folks who own the business to tell union schmucks to take a hike when they're trying to get these card check authorizations. Well, Andy, you wouldn't try that in my business. I guarantee it. But you talk a good game. But yeah, these people are just as authoritarian as, say, the Castro regime. Here's a funny one. Speaking of authoritarianism in the third world, no, Mexico isn't a third world country, but it was a good segue. I wonder why Bernie Sanders, George Miller et al. Were urging the arbitration board of the Mexican state Puebla, quote, here's what they said: "We are writing to encourage you to use the secret ballot in all union recognition elections. We understand that the secret ballot is allowed for but not required by Mexican labor law. However, we feel that the secret ballot is absolutely necessary in order to ensure that workers are not intimidated into voting for a union they might not otherwise choose. We respect Mexico as an important neighbor and trading partner, and we feel that the increased use of the secret ballot in union recognition elections will help bring real democracy to the Mexican workplace." End quote. Sincerely, Bernie Sanders and his dentures, George Miller, and 14 other morons. And they all Bernie voted for the Employee Free Choice Act, which eliminates the secret ballot. So he got old senile Bernie telling a Mexican state, yeah, the secret ballot's pretty good, but I'm going to vote against it here. So the guy's a nutcase. Old Bernie. I think Bernie's brains have been turned to tapioca. Now, there's a lot more I could go over, but I think that's enough for now, because I've got about 25 pages of all kinds of stuff just exposing these morons as authoritarians. Stan Cedar is an authoritarian. Jacqueline Glenn is quite an authoritarian. Old Fart Rants certainly is an authoritarian who they like liberty, when it comes, if it's like a smoking pot or, homosexual marriage, but not, only certain types of marriages. They're real liberty oriented, but when it comes to the individual in the workplace, not so much. So the Janus ruling is a victory for liberty, individual liberty, and will take away a lot of union goons, because about 40% of all union households vote Republican. So there's a big disparity there. 60% still vote Democrat, but 40% of them vote Republican. And they probably don't agree with a lot of the money these idiots spend their money on electioneering for Democrats, because if you look through the campaign finance reform material, which is in my Coctopus response to Old Fart Rants, these unions spend a lot of money. Well, now if someone can say, you know what? No thanks. The skimming gravy train has ended. So again, see that I've got a lot more information down there. I could have gone over a lot more, but that's enough. Have a nice day. and don't thank me now for the refutation.